This video is about the intersection of sexual assault and alcohol and drugs. It's important to acknowledge and remain cognizant of the fact that alcohol or drug use by the victim, perpetrator, or both never caused sexual assault. Research confirms what many of you already know. Drinking or using drugs increases the risk of sexual assault. Approximately 1/2 of sexual assaults involve alcohol consumption by the perpetrator, victim, or both. Alcohol and drug use lead to motor impairments, reducing a person's ability to evaluate risks or physically resist. Sexual assault perpetrators use these impairments to their advantage to not only commit the crime, but to exploit biases about victim responsibility and credibility, making it less likely that a victim will report and less likely others will believe them. Survivors in these situations commonly make delayed reports or don't report at all for fear they will be judged or not believed. Perpetrators are still responsible for criminal activity when they are high or drunk, and we must recognize and document their efforts to create or manipulate factors that increase victim vulnerability.
We know that rapists exploit vulnerabilities, and intoxication is one of the most common vulnerabilities that rapists exploit.
In these type of cases, it's going to require a lot more diligence on your part to help establish what was their level of impairment at the time and how do we prove the level of impairment and whether or not that victim had the ability to consent.
Be cognizant of evidence indicating the victim's state of incapacitation, as reported by eyewitnesses or as seen in photos or videos on surveillance cameras or social media. Explore whether the victim experienced any loss of memory, disorientation, slurred speech, dizziness, confusion, severe illness or hallucinations, reduced inhibitions, or other signs of impaired motor function.
So when working a sexual assault case involving drugs or alcohol, it's very important to just do the most thorough investigation that you can possibly do. So going and collecting any credit card receipts that you can, talking to any witnesses that might be available that were there prior to, during, and even after a sexual assault that can piece together everything that happened, get that timeline going, and then also looking for any electronic evidence you can, maybe cell phone data or any surveillance cameras that might have been in the area.
I had a case involving an intoxicated victim who said she woke up to being assaulted and didn't remember much of her night. And of course, the defendant had said she consented. We were able to put that case together through use of the bartender who remembered cutting her off because she was so intoxicated. So when you track down those bar records, when you talk to bartenders, people at the party, you'll hear that she was falling down and he was okay. So that's the first thing to examine is, was he truly as intoxicated as she was?
Perpetrators may purposefully select victims who are high or drunk, or seek environments where alcohol or drugs are readily available. Be mindful of evidence that the suspect was taking advantage of the victim's incapacitated state. If the suspect was also drinking or using drugs, review evidence to demonstrate their control and behavior in the situation. For example, what do witnesses say about the level of intoxication of the victim relative to the suspect? Who was providing the drugs or drinks? Did the suspect offer to rescue the victim by taking them home? Don't allow a perpetrator to use alcohol or drugs as a defense for sexual assault.
From my experience, what's been one of the biggest challenges is the victim's own self-blame. And lack of memory and recalling. I think as a human, when you're unable to recall specific details, it becomes at times overwhelming and you may second guess yourself.
You know, all survivors of sexual assault will have some problems with memory. Having a blank memory of the event or virtually no memory because of having your senses impaired creates a generalized anxiety. It creates a situation in which reporting it to law enforcement is extremely difficult. They don't feel like anyone's going to be supportive of them.
One thing that's very important in these types of cases is for an officer just to be very supportive of the victim. Give them time when you're going through the interview and the detail of events. Don't pressure them or don't make them feel bad for not being able to remember. Be very encouraging.
Research tells us that a survivor's memory will be negatively impacted because of the effects of trauma on the brain. These effects are compounded by alcohol and drugs. Practitioners should anticipate victims having trouble recalling an event in a chronological or non-fragmented manner. Individuals working with survivors should normalize this experience and address anxieties and fears regarding memory loss and fragmentation. Ask questions about their sensory experience, like hearing, feeling, seeing, and smelling. This may be easier for a survivor to recall. Ask the survivor open-ended questions about what they remember and ask clarifying questions at the end.
When you're working with them, it's really important that you ask questions in such a way that you don't increase that feeling of blame. Why didn't you do this, or why didn't you do that? It feels innocuous to you, but from where they're sitting, it is going to feel like they're being judged for not having made good choices. They're going to feel like it's their fault that this happened to them.
We know that the societal misconceptions related to drugs, alcohol, and sexual assault impact people serving on a jury. We have to work hard in courtrooms to address the persistent myths and biases that make holding perpetrators accountable so difficult.
The juries will tend to assess some level of culpability to victims who've consumed alcohol or drugs prior to being assaulted, kind of that old mentality that she asked for it.
The crime is the choice of the perpetrator, the person who commits the crime, and has nothing to do with behaviors that victims do or avoid.
I think it's very true that people don't do things completely outside of their nature when under the influence of alcohol. Have you ever been drunk? You know, half your jury's going to say, yes, they have been drunk. Have you ever been so drunk that you raped your friends?
I had people at various different stages throughout the entire investigation try to couch this as just drunk sex.
Victim incapacitation from alcohol or drugs can be a case fact and is not a reason to doubt or drop the case. It may be proof of why the perpetrator selected that person to victimize. Utilize an expert witness to explain the physical signs and symptoms of drug or alcohol impairment. If there was evidence that the victim's blood alcohol was 2 or 3 times the legal limit for driving, a jury can understand why the victim could not have consented.
Instead of looking at it as a bad fact, think about it in terms of a factor that perpetrator used to make that victim more vulnerable and more accessible to assault. Having someone who can talk about how perpetrators prey on victims, how they supply the alcohol, how they pick out their victims and pick out someone who is vulnerable in some way, what you wear, what you drink, how you dress, none of that causes rape. Rapists cause rape.
Alcohol or drug use is a common characteristic of sexual assault cases. Advocates, law enforcement, and prosecutors should be prepared to address the challenges of these cases. Anticipate and be prepared to normalize the memory loss experienced by survivors. Ask open-ended questions and ask sensory questions about what the survivors heard, felt, saw, and smelled. Systematically collect evidence to establish a timeline and the level of impairment of the survivor and perpetrator, including toxicology reports, cell phone forensics, credit card receipts, witness interviews, and pictures or videos from surveillance video or phones. Utilize an expert witness to explain a survivor's self-blame, second-guessing, delayed report, memory loss, inability to convey a logical timeline, or other survivor behavior that may seem counterintuitive. Above all, convey your care and concern to the survivor and treat them as a valued member of the investigation and prosecution, regardless of the case outcome. To learn more, collaborate, and support our research, visit our website at sites.utexas.edu/IDVSA.